Hi everyone, and welcome to Financial Basics, where we make money grow with you. Today I'm going to be talking about Dave Ramsey's Baby Steps. Is this genius or is it outdated? And what should your take be on the Dave Ramsey's Baby Steps? Let's get started. So who is Dave Ramsey? He's a financial coach, financial advisor. He's been talking to people about money for multiple decades at this point. He's a best-selling author, personal finance expert, and obviously he hosts the Ramsey Show. I've included a link there to his site. So what actually happened? Dave Ramsey went bankrupt in 1988 due to a combination of really aggressive real estate investing and a reliance on short-term bank loans. So what he was doing fundamentally, if you just want to summarize it, he was doing 90-day loans for property, right? So you can't even get this today if you're a normal investor, like normal average consumer investor. You can't go and get a 90-day loan on a property. He had over $1 million in debt. A larger bank purchased the bank that he was using, and they decided this is too much risk for one individual, and they called his loans. And there was a clause in these loans that basically said, we require immediate repayment of the loans. He was positive in his assets if you looked at his overall net worth, but calling in $1 million worth of loans on such short notice, he was left with no real choice except to declare bankruptcy. And they refused to basically refinance or negotiate with him, and he declared bankruptcy in 1988. This absolutely transformed his philosophy on money. After going bankrupt, Ramsey really studied financial finance, personal finance, and he took a cash-based, completely debt-free lifestyle. That's what he took on after that point. He considers debt and risk, and he says anything with debt, you're carrying extra risk on that, and he thinks it's not worth it. That was his conclusion from that experience. This led to the creation of the Baby Steps, and he ran a radio show, and he's written multiple books, and he's done a lot of financial coaching and financial coach programs. And he has absolutely, I don't want to make this negative, he has absolutely helped millions of people in the US and across the world get out of debt and really get started on the process of building wealth. Let's take a look and let's break that down. So, step one, save $1,000 as your starting emergency fund. The good about this, it helps build financial discipline. It provides a minimal safety net to avoid new debt. Now, the biggest criticism that I've heard with regards to this particular step is $1,000 is not enough. There's no way I can do it with $1,000. And what you're going to find is the people that make that complaint or that specific concern, you will almost always see those are the people that have 10,000 in their accounts. Yes, they might have credit cards of 20 or 30 or 40,000, but certainly they have more than 1,000, and they are being asked in step one, actually I need to go down in my cash to pay off debt. I need to allocate those funds. So if you have 10,000 in your bank and you have 20,000 in credit cards, then Dave Ramsey is going to basically tell you take 9,000 out of your bank account, pay off 9,000 in debt, and then we can start the baby steps. So then you'll have 1,000 left over as your buffer, as your emergency fund, and at that point you can start really tackling your debt. The issue is if you have $1, when he initially introduced this, it was in 1992. Today that's worth $2.25. So $422 back then. $1,000 back then is basically $422 today. So what that means is that $1,000 isn't really worth $1,000 anymore. It's worth a lot less. So a lot of people are concerned. Maybe I should be taking a look at an inflation-based $1,000 based on the 1992 pricing. But obviously that's just something to think about. The thing for me with regards to step one is it's only designed to cover the little things that might pop up. And it's really supposed to be short term. You're like supposed to be in this state or in step one for like a couple of months, right? Or a month or two. And the idea, is it just keeps you away from the credit cards, and it forces you to really reassess how you're managing your finances. And what I mean by that is it is harder, it is more challenging and more complicated to go from 0 to 1,000 than it is to go from 1,000 to 10,000. So if you have 0, if you are getting to the end of the month and you are reaching for the credit card before you reach for your paycheck, that means that you really are living paycheck to paycheck, month to month, or whatever the case. If that's every 2 weeks, so be it. And this step is for you. If you have 10,000 in cash and you're complaining about step one, this step is not for you. This step is for somebody who has nothing in their accounts at the end of the month, or they have reached already for the credit card at that point. And the amount of work that you have to do to get to the point where you can actually save 1,000, you're looking at your budgets, you're building a budget potentially if you don't have one at the moment, you're looking at your subscriptions, you're looking at all of your expenses, you're looking at Amazon, you're looking at everything that you can to cut back, to go from I have nothing at the end of the month, or I didn't even make it to the end of the month, to the point where you have $1,000 saved. $1,000, if you're in that situation, is a lot of money. And that's my take on step one for Dave Ramsey, right? When you're $1,000 emergency fund, and the most common complaint being, well, 1,000 isn't enough. Well, 1,000 is actually a lot. It's a stretch goal if you're starting on negative. And what I mean by negative is you're reaching for the credit card before you get to the end of the month, before you get to your next paycheck. And I guarantee you, what you'll find is if you look through your bank statements for the last 3 to 6 months, you're going to find a ton of expenses in the 0 to 1,000 range where life has just surprised you and has thrown this thing at you, whatever it is. And the $1,000 is designed to address those issues. It's designed to address the little life things that happen day to day, week to week, month to month. And really, you just need to understand that you're attempting to build a buffer where the last thing that you reach for is your credit card. Step 2. Pay off all debt except the mortgage using the debt snowball. What is good about this? Small wins psychologically work. They really do. And if you are overwhelmed, if you have a lot of little debts or a lot of credit cards, or you've got this balance and this balance, where you have a whole bunch of credit cards, a whole bunch of personal loans, whatever the case may be, potentially a car is included in that as well. It's layering all those expenses out, smallest to largest, and trying to figure out how to tackle them in a meaningful, successful way, where once you've started that process and you're progressing, you'll actually find that it is easier to stick to it. So that is the thought process in terms of making this rule and doing Snowball, because the number one complaint is it doesn't make mathematical sense. You should be using the avalanche method. But the avalanche method might take you, your highest interest payment might be a car. And that might be 20,000. And it might take you 3 years to pay that off, or 2 years to pay that off. And in the Dave Ramsey approach, the Snowball approach, that might be the last thing you tackle, where you've now had 6 months or a year of experience and practice, where you've built up the necessary skill set to start tackling debt, and then you have to hit the 20K payment, right? You have to hit the 20K loan. So mathematically, you're paying, it doesn't make sense. The avalanche method is actually more efficient. But what I say is the avalanche method, and the difference between the avalanche method and the Snowball is actually really small for most people if you sit down and actually do the math. So you might find that there's if you're talking about thousands of dollars in debt, you might be talking about, $30 or $50 or $80 in the difference between the one approach or the other, right? So that difference is actually quite small, and it gets smaller the further you go into it. So if you've been doing it for 6 months, the difference actually shrinks as you get closer to paying everything off. My challenge with this approach is it actually ignores the risks associated with each debt. If you have low interest student loans, you should maybe be putting those at the bottom of the pile. Like, there should be personalized consideration for the risk associated with each debt, from a credit profile perspective, from all the different angles that are associated with you as an individual, right? So you should be taking those things into consideration. And if you do the math and you find that there's over a year, there might be a $300 difference or £300 difference between the two strategies, is £300 meaningful to you? And if the answer is yes, and you believe that you're disciplined enough to try the avalanche approach, then you should absolutely go for that. But if you have a history of going back into it, leaning more on the credit cards as you progress, or whatever the case may be, then in that situation, I would say, let's get you started, let's get the ball rolling, and you can do a debt snowball. And you can deal with those costs, because in the long run, it's actually going to be enormously beneficial to get the small wins psychologically. And the key thing here, absolutely, whether you do avalanche, whether you do debt snowball, it doesn't actually matter. The key thing is to start, because if you don't start and you're too scared or you're too worried about, oh no, this one is the most inefficient way, or this one's the most inefficient way, you're losing for every moment that you wait, right? That's the key thing here. But individual circumstances do matter. And you could even be in a situation where there is actually debt there, where it is lower than the mortgage rate. And that clashes with the other steps. And there's other things to consider as well, like what if you're close to retirement? And what if there's a whole bunch of circumstances? You could be medical, there could be pregnancy, there could be your job situation might be a little bit more dicey, where these things need to be taken into consideration for paying down that debt with $1,000 versus potentially thinking on a bigger picture, where am I actually at the moment, and how do I progress? And for me personally, what I want to say as well, just with regards to step 2, I actually see a lot of nuance in there. And the nuance that I see isn't actually tied to the step per se for that specific individual, it's the broader picture. And what I mean by that is the vast majority of people are not credit card people. And that's just a fact. And the numbers back that up. 51% of Americans carry a balance. And depending on the study that you're looking at, it's anywhere between 40 and 60%. 82% of adults in the US have at least one credit card. And 51% of those are carrying a balance, which means 40% of the American population is carrying a balance every month, which is kind of crazy to think about if you just stack those two percentages on top of each other. And the honest opinion here is you don't actually want to, you can argue points, you can argue interest rates, you can argue interest-free purchases if you pay it off every month. You can argue I'm going on trips for free. All of these things are great. But do you want to live in a society where you are actually a walking advertisement? You are the best walking advertisement for a credit card. It's not the adverts that they put on the TV. It's the fact that your friend has a credit card, your brother has a credit card, your family has a credit card, your girlfriend has your wife, whatever, has a credit card. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there going, sure, I'll get one. But the vast majority of people are credit card people. The vast majority of people shouldn't actually be getting a credit card. It's probably bad for them, right? They're paying interest. Every single month they're carrying a balance. And that could be temporary or permanent. So I like Dave Ramsey's approach here. Don't have credit cards. Clear all of your consumer debt. I like that because I see credit cards, if you're walking around with a credit card, and I'm going to be honest, I have a credit card. I make sure that I have a cash balance in my current account to clear it before I use it. And I only use it for travel where I am going internationally, where I need to do international transactions for foreign exchange. And that is the only time I use a credit card, because for debit cards, they'll charge you for that. So that is when I use a credit card. And I have been on holiday before where I will clear the credit card while I am still on holiday. I am in the other country. I am spending stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not letting that balance sit until tomorrow morning. I'm going to clear it right now. So I go through it where I'm clearing the balance almost as I go. A couple of weeks back, I was on holiday and I tipped an Uber, and that tip sat on my credit card. They hadn't actually cleared it for like a week. It was like a couple of dollars or $2 or something like that. It was just a tip for an Uber drive. And I was literally, I was annoyed. I was like, when is this going to clear? I have to keep checking the credit card to make sure that I can get my zero balance and put the credit card away. Step 3, save between 3 or 6 months of expenses, not income, in a fully funded emergency fund. This is absolutely fantastic, and I really believe this applies to everybody, not just specific individuals. It is your safety net to prevent falling back into debt. But the other side of that, and I want to be clear, it is also a shield for your nest egg and your investments, right? So it prevents you from reaching to a loan or selling your investments. And the challenge here, and there is almost a double or even triple whammy, where if you need, i.e. an emergency, if you need to spend money, you're possibly doing it at the worst possible time. Maybe you've lost your job. Why have you lost your job? You might be in a recession. Okay, stock market is down 20%. You've lost your job. It's a recession. You might not get another job for the next couple of months. Stock market is down 20%, and now you have to sell your shares to cover your monthly expenses because you don't have an emergency fund. The emergency fund acts as that buffer between you as an individual and selling your shares at the worst possible time. It's the same reason I say don't invest or don't buy shares in the company that you work for, because if that company goes bust, you've lost your job and you've lost your investment because the shares might be worthless or worth a lot less than what you paid. So having an emergency fund, whether it's 3 months, whether it's 6 months, whether it's 1 month, doesn't matter. Whatever you decide is appropriate, you need to have that buffer between your real life and your investments, so that if something goes wrong, you're not drawing down on your investments at the worst possible time. The other thing to note here is the biggest investment firms in the world do this. They keep an enormous amount of cash on hand, especially in times where they believe the stock market is overpriced, or if they think that there might be panic, or whatever the case may be. If they think there are certain risks, they increase the amount of cash that they have on hand to grab opportunities. So you need to have almost the same mentality when it comes to how much cash you have and how much cash you keep on hand. It needs to be part of that equation for calculating how much you think you need personally. And the other thing is, when your back is against the wall, if the stock market is down 20% and you've lost your job, you're very much in a mode of panic. And what happens when you're panicking is you might end up making bad decisions. And you want to avoid that as much as possible by making sure that you approach different situations and different scenarios with a more calm attitude. And the reason for that is because you're going to make bad decisions if you are at at the border, at the boundary, right, of the money. If you don't have any emergency fund and you are living month to month, even if you have a lot of investments, you're still going to be a little bit panicky. You're still going to make bad decisions. You're going to make decisions thinking about the short term. So my challenge with regards to step 3 and saving those 3 to 6 months, certainly there's going to be people out there that might need more than 6 months. And there's a whole bunch of factors that come into play in terms of deciding how much you need. It's an individual decision. It's a personal decision. For me, I would be looking at past experiences is where I draw my basis for deciding how much you need, right? So if you've lost your job 3 times in the last 5 years, I would be thinking about a larger than 6-month emergency fund. If you're in a high risk industry, if you're working in a high risk industry, if you have an expensive car, think about it. If you have a big house, think about it. So all of these things need to be kept in step with each other and with the risks associated with the way that you're living and your lifestyle. The other thing to consider is sometimes even 3 to 6 months could potentially be too much, especially if the investments that you're protecting, as I said, the emergency fund is the gap between yourself and everyday life and your investments and your savings. So the question becomes, well, if those savings are very small, do you still need the 3 to 6 months, or can you build those two up together? The other thing that for me is a bit of a red flag with regards to this step is if you are very close to retirement. So as you move closer to retirement, you should be building up a cash buffer to protect yourself from fluctuations in the stock market. You might need to survive for up to 2 years if the market is down. And the question then becomes, you might need that in cash. But if you follow Dave Ramsey's steps very carefully, and you were on baby step 3, and you were very close to retirement, potentially even 5 years, 3 years away from retirement, this might not be best for you to only have 6 months of money saved up as you get to that period of your life. Who is it for? This is for everybody. I am yet to come across any situation where somebody argued successfully that actually I don't need an emergency fund and this is why. Most of the time, if somebody doesn't think they need an emergency fund, the reason for that is because they have some other kind of backup, right? So they have family that will let them stay with them, or they have somebody that they can borrow money from. Whatever it is, they have some situation that allows them access to either additional funds or to reduce their living costs. Just examples, or should I say variables that you should be taking into consideration when deciding how big your emergency fund should be. If you're a single income household, you should probably look at maybe more, or lean on the more side. And that means 6 months. But Remit City, for example, has said that up to a full year of emergency fund is probably an appropriate number. So it really just depends on the individual. If you have unpredictable income, if you're a freelancer, if you're a commission-based job, if you have certain health risks or insurance deductibles that might be quite high, then it's something to think about. And also, if you just sleep better at night knowing you have a lot of money in the bank, or as I mentioned earlier, if you're very close to retirement. Step 4, investing 15% of your income for retirement. This is obviously gross income. And then what it implies is everything else that's spare goes to step 5 and step 6. So what this does is it encourages you to start building, if you haven't done it yet, your investment muscle. It starts getting you into the process of actually making investments. And it is ridiculous how often I see people that do this, and once they've started, it becomes very difficult for them to step away from that. So even if you're putting in $50 a month or £50 a month, you're building a little engine there that just keeps going, right? You don't want to ever be in a point, it's one of the last things that you cut at the end of the day, where you do everything in your power to prevent cutting that if there's some kind of crisis, right? So all of a sudden you're cutting subscriptions, you're cutting your going out budget to prevent the investments going to zero, right? What you're adding there in a crisis. So what I don't like about this step is there isn't really a lot of, it's fixed, right? 15% income goes into investments. There's really no active decision making here on what the appropriate percentage is to invest based on your personal circumstances. So are you close to retirement? Have you got way too much house that you've paid for but you don't have enough in investments? Or potentially you have a lot in investments and you don't have a lot in your house. There's a whole bunch of things that you need to think about here where you need to potentially adjust that percentage. What if your company matches you to 20%? Would you turn that down and go, no, well, I'm only investing up to 15 because I'm following Dave Ramsey's steps? Or would you make that adjustment yourself and go, well, actually, for this particular situation, I'm going to invest the 20% because my company's matching me to that. So that's 15% gross. And again, depends on your personal circumstances, depends on a whole bunch of variables. The things for me, how close you are to retirement, why limit it to 15%? because you're saving for step 4 and step 5 and step 6. But why not invest more if you can, right? If you can afford it, you should certainly do that. And what if you can't afford it? What if your budget is so stretched at the moment, even after step 1, step 2, and step 3, where you cannot make the 15% gross, right? Because 15% gross is a substantial amount of money. It's before tax and before all of the deductions that go off on your salary. And what if you're pregnant, you're going to be having a baby in 6 months, you might not want to do the 15% right now. You might want to be building up a little bit more of a cash buffer. So even, especially if it's like temporary, if you go to Dave Ramsey and you say, hey, this is my situation, he's going to tell you invest the 15%. I'm going to say, take your personal circumstances into consideration, even if they're temporary circumstances where you might need to adjust that percentage accordingly. Step 5, save for your child's college fund. This is a key step. And what this basically says is 15% to your investments, everything else to the college fund or your children's college fund, right? So all extra money. But the question for me is, when is enough, right? So the good thing about this is it encourages the planning ahead. It puts you in a situation where your children don't potentially have to get student loans or partial student loans if you're funding some of that education. So it's just balancing those two. But the questions for me, and these are the issues that I have, is should your retirement savings take priority? Not everyone needs a college degree for success. So it's just figuring out what your situation is as an individual and go, okay, can I actually afford to fund my child's education right now, or can I not? And then I have done a video on this. Could you lump sum an amount into an investment account as a once-off? So how much in terms of future value, if you were getting 10% or 8% in real terms growth in the market, how old is your child? How many years away are you from your child needing college funds? And then what would that investment do if you lump summed it into the market today, where in 10 years time, 15 years time, 20 years time, they're drawing on that, but it's grown sufficiently in that space to cover the funds completely. And then the video that I did is also with regards to children's retirement. Could that money be better utilized on a retirement? Obviously, just take into consideration that a college degree is not necessary for everybody to have financial success. And are you in a good enough financial position yourself to be able to help your child? And you should be looking at your retirement funds. You should be looking at where you're at the moment from that perspective, because you might be 40 or 45, 50 years old. You might have a child that's maybe 10, 12, 15 years old. They're going to be hitting college in the next sort of 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case. And you need to do the math to decide how much you can actually contribute here. And the other question that I have with step 5, which is kind of left hanging, it's an open-ended question, is just how much is enough, right? When do you stop? So it's not specifically clear at what point you decide to stop contributing towards the college fund. If you start when your child is born and you invest X amount every month, do you stop when it's full? And what I mean by that is it covers the fees as they stand today. So let's say it takes you 5 years to accumulate the fees today, right? So let's say it's 50,000 to pay for university, and your fund now is valued at 50,000, but you're maybe 10 years away from your child needing the money. So the question then becomes, okay, I've over-invested in that fund. I've put too much in because that fund is going to continue to grow, and I've already filled it sufficiently to pay for college in today's prices. So it's just figuring out and taking a little bit more of a nuanced approach with regards to the college fund and how much should actually be in there. When is it enough? When do you stop contributing? Step 6, pay off the mortgage early. So normally step 4, 5, and 6 are actually bundled together, because normally you go through these quite quickly or even simultaneously. But once you've dealt with college fund and contributing the 15%, everything ends up going towards the mortgage. So you're completely debt free in this situation except for the house. So now you're tackling the house. Tackling the house, yeah, absolutely great idea. It eliminates a major financial burden in terms of the mortgage payments. It also just gives you peace of mind. You can sleep easy knowing that the house is paid off. But the issue here is really the opportunity cost. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. This is the motivation for the calculator that I built and the video that I did on mortgage versus investing. This is the thing that got me completely focused on that, because you can actually do the math. This is 2 equations where you're actually just minimizing each one, right, and trying to solve for where they intersect. So the opportunity cost here, you could be investing that money, you could be getting a higher return in the market than what you do on your house. And the other side of it is inflation does actually erode debt. So if you have a payment where, let's say you have a 15-year mortgage or a 10-year mortgage or a 5-year mortgage, you've now fixed the price of your mortgage payment for potentially 5 years. So what does that mean? That means that if inflation increases by 5% or 10% or 3% in that year, it means technically the payment that you're making, because it's fixed, in real terms is actually worth less. So it's becoming worth less as time progresses. So the debt actually helps you erode the value of the payment in real terms, right? So thinking about it from that perspective just maybe changes your thoughts on it in terms of paying the mortgage off early. And in Dave Ramsey's approach, there is absolutely no consideration for balancing the mortgage payments with investments. If you have somebody that has $1 million house, 900,000 of it is paid off, and they still owe 100,000, but they're maybe 5 years away from retirement and they have nothing saved in retirement, almost all of their free money, available money, should be going towards their retirement to deal with that crisis that is coming in 5 years' time. Dave Ramsey would still tell you, pay the mortgage off first. He would say 15% towards investments and then pay the mortgage off. And I do need to give some respect to Dave Ramsey here as well. My calculator, which actually does the maths for each individual, there's not much of a difference. The end result is similar. The goal here is to do something. Whether you invest that money or whether you pay the mortgage off early, you're talking about a few percentage points here. You're not talking about a substantial difference in the end result. You could be house rich and investment poor, but then you could downscale, right? So there's a whole bunch of solutions here that you could do. And what my calculator does is it shows it as a time-based value instead of a dollar-based value, where the difference between paying the house off early and then investing everything, or investing everything and then paying the house off once you've reached your targets for your retirement fund, the one or the other, it's probably going to be a couple of months off. And if you're talking about timelines of 10 or 15 or 20 years, and the difference between the two becomes 1 year or 2 years, that is not the end of the world. And as a general rule, this is actually a very good approach, especially for somebody that isn't sure or doesn't know how to do the math. And the other challenge here is your money does get tied up in an illiquid asset, right? It's very difficult to get that money out of the house, especially if you want to stay in the house. Then you have to remortgage it if you want those funds, or you have to sell it and buy something smaller, or buy something that's less expensive. So my advice with regards to step 6, absolutely do the math. I will include the link to my calculator in this video, where you can actually sit down, look at how much free money you have and how you should be distributing that between the mortgage and your investments based on your goals, based on getting a zero mortgage, and based on whatever your FIRE number is, whatever your goal is for your retirement. If you could be 100,000 or 30,000 away from your mortgage, but you could be 1 million away from your retirement number that you need in order to retire. This is a graph generated from my calculator, just demonstrating that. It shows the intersecting point between the two graphs, and it shows, in this particular example, if somebody had 5,000 free in a month and they wanted to allocate those funds, the ideal value would be where that's minimized. The earliest possible date. It also obviously shows the gap between the earliest possible date and the latest possible date, which isn't actually that big of a difference. Step 7, building wealth and giving generously. A lot of people, once their needs are met, once their concerns around retirement and investing and debts have all been resolved, all been sorted, there aren't a lot of ways to actually improve your level of happiness. But what the studies show, what the psychology shows, is philanthropy is actually a really big thing in that space. Once you can pay all your bills and you don't have to worry about the day-to-day living costs, philanthropy is definitely one of the easiest ways to get to happiness. Buying stuff is a temporary thing. So the psychology basically says if you buy a new car, you're happy for a couple of weeks or a month, and then it's just a nice car sitting in your driveway. But certainly giving has shown throughout the world, and just all of the studies have basically shown that giving really has an impact on you personally. It's why some of the wealthiest people in the world constantly give enormous sums of money away, just because of that. They actually personally benefit from it. So the issue here that I have, you've gotten to this step, congratulations, but it doesn't actually talk a lot about the wealth building in between, right? So you invest 15%, pay the house off, and then invest as much as you can. Okay, congratulations, you're at step 7. It doesn't actually talk about the wealth building strategies that you need beyond debt free. And the other question is, why wait? I mean, if you look at somebody like Ramit, why wait until you're at step 7 to enjoy life? Why not figure out ways to enjoy life now? It's almost like Dave Ramsey goes, let's hunker down until we're at step 7 and then we can enjoy life. And some people argue that you should take vacations, you should enjoy life, you should start giving even smaller amounts earlier on rather than waiting until you're fully debt free. And a paid off house isn't always the best move here. There could be other options, and financially, some of the financially more savvy people might say leveraging a low interest mortgage to invest even more is actually going to put them in a better position overall financially. Ramsey obviously focuses on extreme frugality rather than sort of smart risk taking, right? Managing those. And some believe that a calculated risk like real estate or business investing should actually be encouraged more like earlier on rather than waiting until this point. Just a couple of additional notes as well that I wanted to talk about specifically for Dave Ramsey. The first thing is combining finances. So he's of the perspective that once you're married, all of your money just gets lumped together and everything is combined. So the elephant in the room there is divorce. And 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce. It's even higher if you go to second marriages, where it's somewhere between 60 and 67% of second marriages end in divorce. And yes, Dave Ramsey caveats it by saying, if you agree on these 4 things, the chance of divorce significantly decreases, right? He says, if you agree on money and how to handle and view money, agree on where you want to have children, how many, how to raise them, agree on how to handle extended family, and then how religious, or making sure that you're agreeing on what religion to practice. If you agree on those things, the probability of divorce significantly reduces. Now, that word significantly could be actually quite small. It could be 5%, right? But let's even consider giving him the benefit of the doubt and say it will reduce the chance of divorce by 90%. Well, if you're at the 40 to 50% divorce rate across all marriages, and there's a 90% chance that you're going to reduce it, even if you can agree on these 4 things, which I actually think is kind of impossible. How do you handle and view money? Well, that's going to change as your relationship goes on, right? As you get older, the way you handle and view money is going to change, and you need to adapt to that. If you don't, if you agree to something up front, and then 5 years later, you've got a different take or a different perspective, you need to understand how to handle that and how to deal with that. Same with children. What if you decide you want to have 3 kids, and then your first child is really rough, and you decide actually 1 is enough, and your partner disagrees with you? How to handle extended family? You're not in control of extended family, and there's not much you can do about their behavior and how they're going to react and handle things, right? A parent could die. So your other half, your better half's parent could die, and all of a sudden both of you are in arguments with your partner's in-law, sisters and brothers, fighting over the inheritance. This is things that you cannot control, and you can't decide how to handle that in advance. I think it's really difficult to do that. Same with religion. Your religious views could change. How hard or how soft you want to be on religious views, because most of it's coming down to how you raise your children. So this is obviously something that you need to just think about in terms of this particular approach. And the example I want to give you, or the comparison really, is for every 1,000 miles you drive, there's a 0.27% chance of an accident. And you keep insurance for that. But if there's a 5% chance, assuming you've got all 4 of these things down, or a 50% chance, if you haven't agreed on these things, if you're just average, would you flip a coin to bet all of your money, all of your investments on everything will be okay? let me just flip a coin. You'd be better off playing Russian roulette. So my perspective with regards to combining finances in marriage is proportional budgeting. And I've done a whole video on this, where you can keep track of what assets you own, how much you own of the house, how much you own of your investments, how much you're paying towards the monthly expenses or whatever your billing cycle is, whether that's every 2 weeks, whether that's once a month, whether that's once every 6 months, it doesn't matter. Proportional budgeting allows you to accommodate for all of those things and allows you to specifically track exactly how much you are investing in this marriage. It allows you to keep your expenses and your accounts separate, but still at the same time making decisions as a team. You don't have to put the money into the same account in order to make decisions as a team. No matter how many times people say that you need to have everything in one account, my perspective is that is complete nonsense. There is no data to show that if money is in one account, you're going to make better decisions. You can have separate accounts. It's really easy to track your money individually and at the same time make decisions together. Example of this, I have supported my wife and paid in proportion to her income for her entire university degree, 2-year university degree. And this has benefited me. Why has it benefited me? Because it gives her the opportunity to earn more, which means she becomes a bigger contributor towards the household income, which means my portion towards our combined expenses is reduced. So there are enormous advantages to proportional budgeting. It actually incentivizes you to push your partner to earn more, pushes your partner to be a better partner. The other thing that I wanted to note with regards to Dave Ramsey's approach was just investing. He thinks you should be looking at mutual funds, and he recommends 4 types of accounts: growth and income, growth, aggressive growth, and international. And these are actively managed funds. And what that means is these are individuals, actual real people, making decisions on what to invest in and what not to invest in. And you are paying for that with a higher fee. And there is something called low-cost index funds, which do not have that. They track an entire index, and history has shown that those low-cost index funds are going to outperform the mutual funds that have all of the money and all of the expertise to decide what to buy and what not to buy in terms of investments. And Dave Ramsey says it himself. We don't have a problem paying a commission for mutual funds. And this is a sales pitch. If you have got through the steps and made it to this point, they want you to call a SmartVestor Pro, their equivalent of a financial advisor, so that that person can recommend mutual funds that are actively managed. My approach, low-cost passive index funds will get you a good, stable, well-diversified investment without paying these commissions. And over your lifespan, this can equate to tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in overall value. If you want an expert, and I'm not saying you don't need one, I'm not saying don't go get an expert, I'm saying if you look at Ramit Sethi, if you want an expert to look over your numbers, look for a financial advisor who charges a flat fee instead of a percentage of the value of the funds. And then a big shout out to Warren Buffett as well, who actually made a bet, $1 million bet, that the S&P 500 index fund would outperform a basket of hedge funds over a 10-year period. And he won that bet. There were no hedge funds willing to take him up and say, yeah, I would outperform the S&P 500 over a 10-year period. Think about that for a second. There was no hedge funds willing to make $1 million bet with Warren Buffett to say that they would be able to beat the S&P 500. The other thing that concerned me on Dave Ramsey's approach was, in a couple of the conversations that he's had on his channel, he mentions a drawdown of 8%, which basically means once you're in retirement, the normal recommended amount is 4% in the FIRE community. He has suggested 8% on occasion. And if you run the models for an 8% drawdown rate, it is not good news. There is a very high chance that your entire portfolio, whatever you have in your investments, is not going to last long enough for you to continue to live. You're going to run out of money if you withdraw 8% every year on your investment portfolio. His business model uses affiliate advisors who pay him a fee and sell you commissioned high load mutual funds, and the whole fiction here is you're going to get 12% returns or 13 or 14% returns every single year. And there is no way he can back down from that statement, because if he does that, his entire business model falls over. Final thoughts. Do you follow Dave Ramsey's baby steps? Or did you? Do you think there's a better way? What adjustments did you make? What has been your experience? When you were going through the steps, was there anything that was non-negotiable for you, where he was saying do 15 and you were saying I'm going to do 20 or I'm going to do 18? What was it that you deviated if you went through this process? I would love to hear from you. And then if you didn't follow, if you did follow the steps precisely without any deviation, I would really want to hear from you as well, talking about your experience following the steps precisely, especially if you followed these steps potentially years ago, where you've had a little bit of time since then to really look back and reflect on it and see some of the down the road consequences of those decisions that you made and following those steps. I would love to hear from you as well. Thank you very much for listening, and see you again next time. Again, if you like this, please subscribe, please like, please share this video with anybody you think would benefit from it. And if you have any questions or requests, please email me as well at financialbasicsabc@gmail.com. See you next time. Goodbye.